Here are 20 things you didn't know about The Lord of the Rings, and you genuinely won't believe how intense the final 5 got. Before New Line Cinema saved the day, Harvey Weinstein held the film right at Miramax and flat out demanded that Peter Jackson permanently execute one of the 4 main Hobbits. The studio wanted cheap, modern Hollywood shock value to raise the narrative stakes, and Bob Weinstein openly admitted he didn't care which Hobbit caught astray. It ruins the innocence of their on-screen camaraderie, but a hidden trick with the Dark Lord himself shows how much was actually cut. Sauron's heavy, armored silhouette looms over the entire trilogy, but he actually clocks less than 2 minutes of physical screen time across the 11-hour extended cut. Peter Jackson pulled off a massive cinematic magic trick, weaponizing editing to transform a literal static lighthouse into a suffocating, omnipresent threat. We spent 3 movies terrified of a guy who barely showed up, purely because the psychological pacing made his gaze feel like it was burning through the screen. That illusion fell apart because Orlando Bloom's bright blue contacts severely scratched his corneas, forcing the crew to pull them out for days to let his eyes heal. Because CGI touch-ups were limited back then, the theatrical cut contains several high-profile scenes where Legolas accidentally has Bloom's natural deep brown eyes. Physical deterioration wasn't limited to the actors' bodies, though. The wardrobe department actually tracked that internal rot by physically manipulating the fabrics the characters wore. If you track Frodo or Boromir frame by frame, their clothes progressively fray, shrink, and take on darker, muddy tones as their mental health decays. The costume team essentially turned standard wardrobe into a silent, visual tracking system for spiritual rot. Meanwhile, a massive legal battle was brewing outside the studio walls. Those Hollywood suits weren't the only ones clashing with the source material, because J.R.R. Tolkien's own son, Christopher, absolutely despised the movies. He publicly argued that the films gutted the book's deep philosophical core just to market an action-heavy spectacle for teens. It breaks the illusion of a happy family blessing. And to capture that legendary literary magic, the crew had to invent wild optical illusions on set. Instead of leaning on lazy green screens, Jackson built forced perspective sets where props on one side of a table were physically oversized. This meant actors couldn't actually look at each other. Elijah Wood and Ian McKellen spent emotional scenes staring at blank walls and taped marks instead of making eye contact. And that mental strain was nothing compared to the literal danger waiting at the Black Gate. The production team hired the New Zealand Army to play extras for that massive final showdown. But the chosen film location was an active military training range. The ground was heavily littered with unexploded, highly unstable landmines, forcing the military to sweep specific safe pathways for the charge. When you see those soldiers rushing forward with pure panic in their eyes, they're sprinting through an active minefield. Corporate boardrooms nearly created a disaster of a different kind. Miramax flatly refused to fund a sprawling trilogy early on, delivering a brutal ultimatum to compress all 3 massive books into one singular 2-hour feature. This proposed script entirely axed the Battle of Helm's Deep, combined Rohan and Gondor, and executed Saruman in the first act. The trilogy we love was exactly one corporate meeting away from becoming a butchered, unrecognizable cash grab that would have permanently killed the entire fantasy genre. Even after securing 3 films, specific actors faced absolute torture in the makeup chair. John Rhys Davies was so violently allergic to his foam latex Gimli prosthetics that the chemicals literally burned his skin off and swelled his eyes shut. The physical damage was so severe that doctors restricted him to filming just once every 3 days so his face could scab over. Gimli's iconic, short-tempered, and deeply aggressive attitude was a veteran performer channeling genuine, agonizing physical torment into every single take. Jackson directed a stadium of 25,000 roaring New Zealand cricket fans during a match intermission to chant phonetic black speech lyrics off a giant screen. Sound designers captured this massive crowd to construct the unified, terrifying war cry of the 10,000 Uruk-hai assaulting Helm's Deep. The monstrous, spine-chilling audio footprint of Saruman's legendary army was built by the raw, acoustic violence of everyday sports fans screaming in unison. And a different kind of real pain was happening directly on camera. The desperate, exhausting hunt for Merry and Pippin looks punishingly real because the actors were physically destroyed. Orlando Bloom fractured 3 ribs after falling off of a horse, Viggo Mortensen broke his toes kicking a steel helmet, and Gimli's scale double, Brett Beatty, blew out his knee. These 3 spent weeks sprinting across rugged New Zealand terrain while heavily medicated, actively masking severe bone trauma during every single wide shot. That grueling physical realism almost culminated in a different final boss fight. Jackson actually filmed an entire sequence where Aragorn fights a physical human form Sauron right outside the Black Gate. Realizing late in post-production that a standard sword fight totally ruined Tolkien's thematic focus on the ring, he ordered animators to digitally paste a computer-generated troll over Sauron's body. And when you watch Aragorn brutally fight for his life against that massive monster, his choreography, strikes, and near-death struggles were originally reacting to the Dark Lord himself. Scrapping that fight was a breeze compared to replacing the original King of Gondor. Stuart Townsend spent 2 months training, mastering swordplay, and bonding intensely with the core cast as Aragorn. Jackson abruptly fired him just 72 hours into principal photography because the raw footage proved he looked way too young to portray a hardened ranger. The Fellowship's celebrated off-screen brotherhood was instantly shattered, forcing Viggo Mortensen to step off a transatlantic flight and start filming immediately with 0 rehearsal time. A terrifying stunt mishap almost cut that legendary performance incredibly short. That near miss on set became terrifyingly real when an actor playing an orc accidentally launched a genuine, unblunted steel dagger directly at Viggo Mortensen's face instead of throwing it wide. The performer's prosthetic mask threw off his depth perception, turning a routine stunt into a lethal accident. Aragorn instantly deflecting that incoming blade with his sword wasn't cool choreography. It was Mortensen utilizing his split-second real-world fencing instincts to save his own life. An entirely different kind of psychological torture was happening far away from the active battle sets. Now, Andy Serkis spent months separated from the core cast, trapped inside a sterile motion capture studio, or shivering in freezing rivers wearing a skin-tight suit while others reacted to thin air. This detached environment meant he missed out on the natural off-camera bonding the other actors shared. The absolute desperation and fractured loneliness bleeding through Gollum's performance perfectly mirrored the actual, profoundly isolating professional reality Serkis endured behind the scenes. Brace yourself, because David Bowie actively campaigned to play Elrond, a bizarre casting choice that almost turned Middle-earth into a pop star vehicle before an unexpected disaster on the water nearly claimed actual lives. The fatal drown-in close call, that near miss occurred while filming Boromir's somber funeral boat drifting down the river when a heavy underwater security chain suddenly snapped under the immense pressure. The current violently hijacked the vessel, dragging the stunt crew straight toward an unmapped river vortex. That hauntingly peaceful, melancholic send-off falls apart when you realize the crew on the riverbanks was screaming in pure terror. The real emotional devastation on set, however, didn't require any life-or-death accidents. Those heartbreaking final goodbyes at the Grey Havens feel heavy because the actors refused to break character between takes. Elijah Wood, Sean Astin, and the rest of the cast spent days sobbing off camera to keep their grief raw and unfiltered. Those wet eyes weren't a result of cheap glycerin drops or standard Hollywood acting tricks. These guys were processing the actual end of a 4-year shared life experience that changed them forever. And believe it or not, an even heavier breakdown was completely unscripted. When King Theoden openly weeps outside his son's tomb, Bernard Hill was channeling an intense encounter with the real-world grieving mother he met before filming. She had looked him in the eyes and confessed that she simply couldn't bear outliving her own child. The tragic, unforgettable line, "No parent should have to bury their child," wasn't written by Tolkien or the screenwriters. Hill improvised it, anchoring Middle-earth fantasy in raw, living human trauma. That profound, lingering pain exposes an aggressive biological truth about the main hero. Tolkien's deep lore reveals that the Morgul blade wound Frodo took at Weathertop never actually healed, permanently destroying his nervous system and triggering severe phantom illnesses every single year. Escaping to the Undying Lands wasn't some magical, happy retirement package at the end of a long journey. It was a desperate terminal trip to an elven hospice because Frodo's mortal body was actively shutting down from a chronic, supernatural poison killing him from within. But his agonizing sacrifice laid the groundwork for an actual miracle at Mount Doom. Tolkien's personal letters revealed that Gollum didn't just clumsily trip into the fires of Mount Doom by bad luck. The supreme god of Middle-earth, Eru Ilúvatar, personally intervened and caused that fateful slip to reward Frodo's long-term mercy. It rewrites the climax. The war wasn't won by military strategy or hobbit resilience, but because Frodo's ultimate empathy allowed a literal deity to step down from the heavens and physically tip the scales. Which of these behind-the-scenes secrets shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments.